The invitation arrived in a plain white envelope. No handwritten note. No warmth. Just a printed card. Harold Bennett Retirement Celebration, family only. Saturday, 6 p.m. The Meridian Club. I stared at the words family only longer than I should have. Because technically, I was family. But technically has never worked in my favor. My father sent the follow-up text 12 minutes later. It's going to be a small, intimate evening. Just immediate family. You understand. Immediate. The word sat heavier than it should have. I typed 3 responses before settling on one. Of course. I set my phone down and looked around my office. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Walnut dusk. The city 23 stories below, moving with indifferent precision. On the wall behind me hung a framed incorporation certificate. Bennett Strategic Holdings. Filed 8 years ago. My name alone. Immediate family. I almost smiled. The Meridian Club had polished marble floors and a discreet brass plaque by the entrance. Membership required a referral and an unspoken understanding of hierarchy. I knew because I paid the annual fee. Not for myself. For the holding company. I arrived at 5:42 p.m. Not dressed for a scene. Just a navy suit. Clean lines. Quiet. Through the glass doors, I could already see them gathered in the private dining hall. My father stood at the center of it all. Gray suit tailored sharply. Hair silvered, but styled deliberately. He looked pleased. My younger brother, Ethan, hovered near him, laughing too loudly at something one of Dad's business friends said. My stepmother, Linda, adjusted floral arrangements on a long table set with crystal and white linen. I wasn't on the seating chart. The hostess glanced at her tablet when I approached. Name? Daniel Bennett. She scrolled. Paused. I'm sorry, sir. This event is private. I know. She looked uncomfortable. It says family only. Yes. Her eyes flicked up at me. Then over my shoulder. I didn't need to turn around to know my father had seen me. I felt it. That slow, assessing look he's had since I was 12. He approached with measured steps. Not angry. Controlled. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. There was no greeting. No handshake. Just a boundary. I received the invitation, I replied calmly. It was informational. Informational. Like a press release. Behind him, Ethan noticed me and leaned toward one of the guests, whispering something. 2 heads turned. Then 3. Public dismissal has a temperature. It's cool. Almost polite. I thought I was family, I said evenly. Dad's jaw tightened. You made it clear years ago that you wanted distance. Distance. That's one version of the story. I moved out, I corrected. I didn't resign. He exhaled slowly, the way he does before closing negotiations. This isn't the place. No, I agreed. It isn't. Linda stepped closer, lowering her voice. We don't want tension tonight, Daniel. Your father worked 40 years for this. 40 years. I looked past them into the room. Large framed photos had been placed on easels. Dad shaking hands with executives. Dad breaking ground on developments. Dad cutting ribbons. Legacy curated. But I noticed something interesting. The newest photo on display was 8 years old. 8. The same year Bennett Development Group quietly shifted ownership structure. The same year Dad stepped back from operations. The same year I signed 12 acquisition documents in a single afternoon while he was recovering from what the press called exhaustion. He called it something else. I built this company, he used to say. And technically, he did. At first. Ethan approached now, smile thin. Bro, don't make this awkward. I held his gaze. I'm not. You're not on the list, he added. I noticed. Dad straightened slightly, his voice firm but controlled. You've chosen your path. We've chosen ours. Interesting phrasing. You're celebrating retirement, I said. From what exactly? The question hung there. Linda's expression shifted first. Ethan looked confused. Dad didn't blink. Security, he said. Staff. The hostess nodded nervously and stepped away. 2 men in dark suits near the bar glanced over. He was willing to escalate this to removal. In front of investors. In front of family. I could have said it right then. I could have corrected the narrative in 12 words or less. But timing is leverage. And leverage, when applied too early, loses its effect. So instead, I adjusted my cuff. "I won't stay," I said calmly. Relief flickered across Ethan's face. Dad's shoulders eased a fraction. "But," I added, "you might want to be careful about who you call immediate." His eyes sharpened. "What does that mean?" I gave him the same polite smile he'd perfected over decades. "It means retirement paperwork can be complicated." Linda's hand stilled on Dad's arm. Ethan frowned. Dad's voice lowered, almost dangerous now. "Are you threatening something?" "No," I replied. "I'm observing something." I stepped back toward the entrance. No shouting. No scene. Just presence. As the doors closed behind me, I caught one final detail through the glass. A man I didn't recognize stood near the corner of the room. Mid-50s. Dark suit. Watching me carefully. Not a guest. Not staff. Observing. And when our eyes met, he gave the slightest nod. That's when I realized something important. Dad hadn't just excluded me. He'd hired someone. And if he'd hired a private investigator, it meant he was already afraid of what I might reveal. The first time my father told me I wasn't built for leadership, I was 16. We were standing in the unfinished shell of what would later become Bennett Plaza, 3 stories of concrete and exposed wiring. I had spent the entire summer working the site. Not because he asked me to, because I wanted to understand how things were built. He handed me a clipboard and said, almost casually, "You're too quiet. People don't follow quiet men." I remember looking down at the blueprints in my hands. "I don't need them to follow," I said. "I just need them to sign." He laughed. Not cruelly. Dismissively. That was the pattern. Ethan got praise for presence. I got comments about potential. Potential is a polite word for not yet. When I graduated from college with a degree in corporate finance, Dad shook my hand instead of hugging me. "Good," he said. "Now you'll understand what real work looks like." He brought Ethan into the company first. Vice President of Strategic Relations. No experience. But he had charisma. I started lower. Analyst. Salary, $62,000. I didn't complain. I studied. For 2 years, I sat in on acquisition meetings and watched my father negotiate with a style built on volume and force. He dominated rooms. But I noticed something he didn't. Margins were tightening. Debt was stacking. Projects were leveraged at 68%, then 72%, then 79%. He called it aggressive growth. I called it exposure. The first real fracture came during the Westbrook acquisition. Purchase price, $14.8 million. Projected upside, 22% over 3 years. Actual liquidity on hand? Not enough. Dad wanted to proceed anyway. Risk builds empires, he told the board. I ran the numbers 3 times. Risk also collapses them. I prepared an alternative financing structure. Quietly. No fanfare. I stayed up until 2:17 a.m. adjusting models, layering holding entities, building insulation between operational arms. The next morning, I presented it. Dad didn't let me finish. "We're not hiding behind shell games," he said. "It's not hiding," I replied. "It's protection." He waved me off. The board sided with him. 3 months later, the market shifted. Interest rates adjusted. The exposure widened exactly as projected. By then, it was too late to unwind cleanly. That's when Dad had his exhaustion. Officially, it was stress. Unofficially, it was panic. I was the one who sat in the hospital room while he stared at the ceiling tiles and said, "Fix it." No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a command. So I did. I called 3 contacts I'd cultivated quietly over the years. Structured a multi-layer buyout through a holding company that didn't carry the Bennett name publicly. Bennett Strategic Holdings. Initial capital injected, for $0.2 million. Source, my personal reserves and 2 silent partners who trusted my modeling more than my father's optimism. Incorporation date, 8 years ago next Tuesday. The restructuring saved the company. Publicly, it was framed as a strategic pivot. Privately, ownership shifted. Dad signed documents in a medicated haze. Ethan skimmed without reading. Neither understood the mechanics. They just knew the bleeding stopped. After that, something changed. Dad resumed public appearances, ribbon cuttings, interviews, panels about legacy leadership. But major decisions required approval from the holding structure. From me. He knew it. But we never said it out loud. Instead, he reframed it. You handle back-end operations, he'd say at events. Ethan and I handle vision. Vision. I let him have the microphone. Because I had the contracts. Over the years, I expanded strategically. Acquired minority stakes in adjacent developments. Consolidated debt. Reduced exposure to 41%. Rebuilt credit lines under the holding company's authority. I never corrected him publicly. Not when he introduced Ethan as my successor. Not when he referred to me as support. Support. That word again. But last quarter, something shifted. Dad began asking more questions about the holding company. About liquidity. About control thresholds. He hired new accountants. Then, 3 weeks ago, I noticed something specific. A third-party inquiry into Bennett's Strategic Holdings ownership structure. Discreet. Professional. Not internal. Private. That's when I realized he'd started digging. And tonight, when I saw that man in the corner of the Meridian Club watching me, I knew the digging had reached something. Dad wasn't just excluding me from a retirement party. He was testing boundaries. Seeing how much I'd tolerate. Seeing if I'd show up angry. Emotional. Predictable. Instead, I showed up calm. Left calm. And now he knew something else. I wasn't reacting. I was waiting. At 9:48 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. "This is Marcus Hale," the voice said. "Steady. Professional. We need to discuss your father." I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights below. "Yes," I replied evenly. "We do." Marcus Hale didn't introduce himself twice. Private investigators don't. "I prefer not to discuss sensitive matters over unsecured lines," he said. "Can you meet tomorrow?" "Time?" I asked. 10:30 a.m. Harbor District. Café Verona. Corner table. He hung up without waiting for confirmation. Efficient. I arrived at 10:22. Harbor District on a Sunday morning is quiet, expensive boats rocking lazily in their slips, joggers in tailored athleisure pretending not to look at one another. Café Verona smelled like citrus polish and espresso. Marcus Hale was already seated. Mid-50s. Close-cropped gray hair. Suit that didn't advertise wealth but suggested competence. A leather folder sat neatly in front of him. He didn't stand when I approached. "Mr. Bennett," he said evenly. "Mr. Hale." I sat. No small talk. He slid a single photograph across the table. It was from last night. Me. Outside the Meridian Club. Mid-step. Composed. "You knew you were being watched," he observed. "Yes. That's unusual." "Not really." He studied my face for reaction. He didn't get one. "I was retained by your father 3 weeks ago," he continued. "Scope of investigation, ownership verification, liquidity position, and potential exposure related to Bennett's Strategic Holdings. Direct." I appreciated that. "And?" I asked. He tapped the folder lightly. "You're the majority owner." "Yes." "Controlling interest." "Yes." He paused, watching for denial. There was none. "Your father holds minority equity through legacy shares," he continued. "Your brother holds less than 10%. I didn't correct him. Ethan actually held 7.3%. But precision wasn't necessary yet. "And you structured it legally," Marcus added. "Clean paper trail. Board minutes. Emergency authorization clauses during medical incapacity. Everything documented," I said. He nodded once. "I advised your father of this yesterday afternoon." So that's when the tension shifted at the party. What was his reaction? I asked. Marcus leaned back slightly. Disbelief first. Then anger. Then calculation. That sounded accurate. "He's under the impression you maneuvered control during a vulnerable period." "I stabilized a failing structure," I replied calmly. Marcus's eyes flickered with something that might have been agreement. He asked whether the control could be challenged. And? Not successfully. We held eye contact for a long second. "So why are we meeting?" I asked. He closed the folder but didn't hand it over. "Because your father isn't planning to retire." I didn't move. He announced retirement publicly to consolidate goodwill, Marcus continued. It positions him as patriarch, legacy figure. It also softens scrutiny before he attempts to renegotiate board composition. With what leverage? He believes familial pressure may compel you to transfer operational control back to him. There it was. Not ignorance. Strategy. He's hoping I'll protect optics, I said quietly. Yes. Marcus folded his hands. There's more. Of course there was. 2 days before the retirement announcement, your father met privately with a development group from Dallas. My mind ran projections instantly. They're acquisition hunters, I said. Yes. They prefer majority leverage. Yes. And they don't care about legacy. Marcus didn't smile, but his silence confirmed it. He presented himself as primary decision-maker, Marcus added. Implied consolidation authority, meaning he suggested he could deliver control. Without me. He intends to pressure you publicly, Marcus said. Possibly during tonight's post-party investor dinner. Tonight? He moved it up. I considered that. Escalation. Calculated. Where? The Meridian Club again, Marcus said. Smaller group. Investors only. Timing was interesting. He'd learned the truth yesterday. Now he wanted to reassert dominance quickly. And you're telling me this because? I asked. Marcus finally leaned forward. Because I don't like incomplete narratives. And because your father asked me whether I believed you had the temperament to lead. A pause. And what did you tell him? I asked. I told him quiet men are the most dangerous. Silence settled between us. I looked out the cafe window at the harbor water shifting under late morning light. He thinks I'll react emotionally, I said. Yes. He thinks he can corner me in front of investors. Yes. I nodded slowly. He's confident, Marcus added. He believes authority returns to the loudest voice in the room. That used to be true, I said. Marcus slid the leather folder toward me. Tonight at 8 p.m. He plans to propose a legacy advisory restructure. It's a vote of confidence maneuver. I opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, draft agenda, investor confirmations, and one attachment that made me pause. Preliminary term sheet. Dallas Development Group. Contingent on majority transfer. He was willing to dilute everything. Everything I stabilized. Everything I rebuilt. To feel in control again. I closed the folder carefully. Does he know you're here? I asked. Marcus shook his head once. My contract ended yesterday at 6:15 p.m. Clean. Professional. I stood. Thank you, I said. For what? He asked. For confirming something I already suspected. He watched me closely. You're not angry. No. Why? Because anger is loud. And loud men mistake volume for leverage. I don't need to be, I replied. As I stepped outside into the sharp harbor air, my phone buzzed. A group email notification. Subject line, Investor Strategy Dinner, attendance requested. Sender, Harold Bennett. Time, 8 p.m. Location, Meridian Club, private room B. He was moving fast, which meant he was nervous. And nervous men make public mistakes. I looked down at the term sheet one more time. Majority transfer clause. And signed. He believed he could corner me into compliance. In front of his audience. What he didn't realize was something simple. I don't need the microphone. I need the vote. And tonight. He was about to ask for one. I arrived at 7:56 p.m. 4 minutes early is intentional. 5 is eager. 3 is reactive. Private room B was smaller than the retirement hall, mahogany table, 12 leather chairs, recessed lighting that cast controlled shadows across polished surfaces. 8 investors were already seated. 2 I'd known for years. 3 newer. 1 from Dallas. And at the head of the table, my father. He didn't look surprised to see me. He expected me. That was the point. Daniel, he said smoothly, rising halfway from his chair. Glad you could join us. His tone carried warmth for the room. Not for me. I took a seat midway down the table. Not at the head. Not at the end. Balanced. Ethan sat to Dad's right, posture straight but hands restless under the table. He avoided my eyes. Crystal glasses reflected low amber light. A bottle of Barolo sat open, untouched. Dad tapped his spoon lightly against a glass. A subtle call to attention. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began. "As you know, I announced my retirement last night." Polite nods around the table. "But retirement," he continued with a soft smile, "doesn't mean disengagement." There it was. Reframing. He paced slowly behind his chair. "For 40 years, I've built Bennett Development with one principal: vision." He let that word breathe. "Recently, certain structural adjustments were made during a difficult period in my health." His eyes flicked toward me. Briefly. "Necessary adjustments," he clarified. "However, we are now positioned to refine leadership alignment." Leadership alignment. Translation: regain control. He nodded toward the Dallas representative. "We've been approached with a strategic expansion opportunity. Significant capital injection. Regional scaling." The Dallas man leaned back confidently, hands folded. "Of course," Dad added, voice smooth, "to facilitate this properly, we need clarity in operational command." Now the room was listening. He looked directly at me. "Daniel, as you've handled certain back-end mechanisms over the years, perhaps you can share your perspective." It was framed as inclusion. It was a test. All eyes shifted. I didn't move immediately. Silence expands when you let it. Then I placed both hands lightly on the table. "My perspective," I said evenly, "is that operational command has been clear for 8 years." A few investors exchanged glances. Dad smiled thinly. "Yes, during my recovery." "No," I interrupted softly. "Legally." The word changed the temperature. The Dallas representative leaned forward slightly. Dad's expression hardened, just enough. "We're discussing vision, not paperwork," he said. "Vision requires authority," I replied calmly. "Authority requires majority." Silence again. I opened the leather folder Marcus had given me and slid copies of the incorporation documents down the table. Not dramatically. One by one. "To avoid confusion," I continued, "Bennett Strategic Holdings maintains 51.4% controlling interest in Bennett Development Group." A beat. I own Bennett Strategic Holdings. There it was. Not shouted. Not embellished. Just placed on the table. Ethan inhaled sharply. The Dallas representative's posture shifted immediately. One of the older investors adjusted his glasses. Dad remained standing. "Temporary medical restructuring," he said tightly. "Permanent control transfer," I corrected. "Board ratified. Signed by you. Dated June 14th, 8 years ago." I slid a photocopy toward him. His signature was clear. His hand trembled slightly as he picked it up. "That was contingency planning," he said. It became governance. The Dallas representative cleared his throat. "Mr. Bennett," he said carefully, addressing my father, "our preliminary term sheet assumed majority consolidation under your discretion." Dad didn't respond immediately. He was calculating. Looking for an angle. For clarity, I continued calmly, "No majority transfer can occur without my authorization." The words didn't carry heat. They carried math. One of the longtime investors, Richard, leaned back slowly. "Harold," he said, measured, "why wasn't this disclosed?" Dad's jaw flexed. "It was internal family structure," he replied. Richard shook his head slightly. 51% isn't internal." The room was no longer warm. It was clinical. The Dallas representative closed his folder. "We don't enter contested leadership environments," he said. "Nothing is contested," Dad snapped. For the first time that evening, his volume rose. All eyes turned back to me. I didn't react. "Is it contested?" Richard asked quietly. I met his gaze. "No," I said. "It's documented." Dad looked at me sharply. "You manipulated a vulnerable moment." "I stabilized a collapsing balance sheet." "You sidelined me." "I insulated the company." Our voices weren't loud, but the table felt smaller. Ethan finally spoke, voice tight. "You could have said something years ago." "I did," I replied. "You called it support." Silence swallowed the room again. The Dallas representative stood first. "This changes our posture," he said. "We'll withdraw pending internal alignment." He extended a hand, not to Dad. To me. I shook it. Brief. Professional. As he left, 2 other investors began gathering their papers. Not panicked. Decisive. Dad remained standing at the head of the table. For 40 years, he'd controlled rooms with volume. Tonight, volume didn't matter. Control was written in ink. You blindsided me, he said quietly. I answered the vote, I replied. His shoulders lowered, not in defeat. In recognition. Around us, chairs slid back. Footsteps softened toward the exit. The room emptied without drama. Until only the three of us remained. Dad, Ethan, and me. For the first time in my life. No one was clapping for him. The door clicked shut behind the last investor. The silence that followed wasn't explosive. It was surgical. Dad remained at the head of the table, one hand resting on the polished wood as if steadying himself against invisible motion. Ethan stood near the window, staring out at the darkened skyline like he might find an alternate version of tonight reflected in the glass. No one spoke for a full 10 seconds. It felt longer. You could have handled that privately, Dad said finally. His voice wasn't loud anymore. It was tired. I tried, I replied. When? Ethan shot back, turning from the window. You never said you owned the majority. I never hid it. You never said it. You never asked. That landed harder than anything else. Ethan's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Dad pulled out his chair slowly and sat. Not defeated, but repositioned. Richard will talk, he said quietly. They all will. Yes, I said. You've destabilized perception. No, I corrected. You did. I clarified. His eyes lifted to mine. There was no fury left in them. Just calculation running out of space. The Dallas deal is gone, he continued. It wasn't structured responsibly. It was expansion. It was dilution. He didn't argue. Because he knew. For years, his strength had been growth at any cost. Mine had been insulation. Tonight, the room chose insulation. Ethan walked back to the table and sat heavily. So what now? He asked. That question carried more weight than the confrontation had. Because now it wasn't about ego. It was about consequence. Now, I said evenly, we operate with transparency. Dad let out a breath through his nose. You think investors trust you more? I think they trust documentation. Silence again. He studied me in a way he hadn't in years. Not as competition. Not as threat. But as equal. You've been waiting, he said quietly. Yes. For what? For you to stop assuming I wouldn't act. That was the truth. Not revenge. Not punishment. Correction. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on knees. So you're in charge, he said flatly. I've been responsible, I replied. That's different. Dad looked down at the papers still scattered across the table. His signature on documents from 8 years ago. His authority transferred in black ink. You structured this when I was weak, he said. I structured it when the company was weak. And you never intended to give it back. It wasn't an accusation. It was realization. No, I said calmly. The word didn't echo. It settled. For a moment, I thought he might explode. Instead, he nodded once. Slowly. You always were patient, he said. You always were loud. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Not amused. Acknowledging. The power dynamic had shifted completely now. Not in a dramatic collapse. In quiet acceptance. What do you want? He asked. The same question he'd avoided asking for years. I want governance to reflect reality, I said. Publicly. You're asking me to step aside. I'm asking you to honor the retirement you announced. Ethan inhaled sharply again. Dad closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them, something had changed. Not pride. Perspective. You'll destroy my reputation, he said. No, I replied. You'll preserve it. He frowned slightly. Announce advisory transition. Founder emeritus. Structured succession. Planned legacy. I paused. You leave celebrated. Not corrected. The room absorbed that. He understood optics better than anyone. This wasn't removal. It was reframing. You'd let me keep the title, he asked. Ceremonial. Advisory vote. No operational override. He considered it. You keep Ethan in executive relations, I added. Under defined authority. Ethan looked at me sharply. You're not pushing me out, he asked. No. Why? Because you're good at what you do, I said calmly. When it's contained. Not an insult. A boundary. Dad leaned back in his chair. For the first time tonight, his posture wasn't defensive. It was reflective. You planned this, he said quietly. Yes. How long? 8 years. The honesty hung heavy. He let out a low breath that almost sounded like a laugh. You were never support, he murmured. No. He stood slowly. Not to dominate. Just to close the conversation. You'll draft the announcement, he asked. Yes. And we present it together? Yes. A long pause. Then he extended his hand. Not as father. Not as patriarch. As partner. I took it. Firm. Brief. Ethan watched the exchange carefully. You're serious about this? He asked. Yes. And if we'd voted tonight? I held his gaze. There wouldn't have been one. Because majority doesn't debate control. It exercises it. Dad nodded once more. Tomorrow morning, he said. 10 a.m. press release draft. I gathered the documents calmly. As I walked toward the door, he spoke one last time. You didn't come to the retirement party to be included. I turned slightly. No, I said. Why did you come? I met his eyes evenly. To see he thought I was. The answer stayed with him. As I left the Meridian Club for the second night in a row, the city felt different. Not victorious. Aligned. He tried to corner me publicly. Instead, he revealed himself publicly. And now, he had to live inside the structure I built.